Welcome back to the Napoleonic Stacking Channel. I'm the Napoleonic Stacker, and in this video, we're going to speak about hyperinflation, a cautionary tale. Stay tuned. So, what is hyperinflation and why is it something we should be concerned with? Well, hyperinflation is a rapid rise in prices, nominal cost of goods, and supply of our currency. Almost all hyperinflation has been caused by government budget deficits financed by currency creation. So, since January 2020, the US has printed 40% of all US dollars into existence. The Federal Reserve has been just printing money at full speed to be able to make sure that our government is funded, to make sure that people are stimulated, make sure businesses have money to get us through the challenging times that began in 2020. As a result, our national debt has now skyrocketed to $29.7 trillion. The Consumer Price Index actually rose to 6.8% in 2021. Shadow Stats, which actually uses the 1980s metric, puts it closer to 15%. So if we're using the data that the government's giving us, that puts us at a 38-year high on our CPI inflation. If we're using Shadow Stats, it actually makes it the worst inflation in recorded U.S. history. Does this mean that we're headed for hyperinflation in the United States? No, but what this does mean is it's a disturbing trend of high inflation that we've seen in 2021. And if it continues at this pace, we could certainly end up like some of the nations that I'm going to speak to you about here today. So we're going to look at some examples of hyperinflation from relatively recent history, starting with the Germans in World War I. Germany was producing a tremendous amount of marks in order to be able to fund the war effort and also to be able to sustain their people's way of life throughout the war. Even though all of this money was being printed, because of the uncertainty of how the war was going, the German people in large part were saving their marks. So as a result of that, the prices of goods and services did not appreciate significantly. In 1918, the paper to gold mark was at a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, move on to 1923. The German people, they felt a weight lifted off of their shoulders when the war was over. They felt they could go back to their normal lives and begin spending again. So all of those marks that they had saved were now being pumped back into the German economy. And to compound the problem, after World War I, the German people had to pay reparations for the war. And that additionally created more money printing, which contributed to their hyperinflationary problems. By the end of 1923, the paper to gold mark ratio was 1 gold mark to 1 trillion paper marks. A loaf of bread actually cost 200 billion marks by the end of 1923. There are stories of women in Germany that actually had gold necklaces, and they would use the little links of gold on their necklace to be able to buy food and bread and the things that they needed for day-to-day life because the money was worthless. There's other stories where German people had the money loaded into wheelbarrows to take to buy a loaf of bread, for example, and they'd walk away, they'd come back, and the money's still there, but the person stole their wheelbarrow because the wheelbarrow was worth more than the money it was hauling. So in this tale, you can see how your paper money, while on the surface, it looks like something that holds value. We have faith that it has the ability to buy things for us. In reality, money is gold and silver. And the German people realized this whenever hyperinflation set in between 1922 and 1923. Those who held their marks in gold did well through the hyperinflationary event. Those who had all of their marks in paper were the losers. Moving ahead to more recent history, Venezuela entered their hyperinflationary event around 2016, and this was in large part due to having to fund expensive social programs. There were massive budget overruns. The country ended up going in deep into debt with countries like China to be able to fund their way of life. And as a result, their currency ended up becoming hyperinflated. Those people in Venezuela that had assets or commodities, they fared well. But, at one point, the bolivar was nearly equal to the value of the US dollar. If you had saved all of your wealth in bolivars, you would have been absolutely wiped out in Venezuela. And basically, they're still in the throes of hyperinflation today. There are pictures of people in Venezuela who basically money is just all over the streets, and nobody wants it because it's worth less than nothing. Thomas Jefferson, he said that paper is poverty. Paper money is not money, but the ghost of money. And it rings so true today in these nations that have suffered through high inflation and hyperinflationary events. And probably the most famous example of hyperinflation is Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's hyperinflation began right around 2007, going into 2008. And I actually have a fairly wide collection of Zimbabwean notes that I'm going to show you. Really, problems began in 2006, but major issues didn't start happening until 2007, 2008 with their currency. This is a pretty mundane $1 bill from the Bank of Zimbabwe. You can see the front and the back. Moving on to the 5. Again, nothing too spectacular about this. We have $5 bills in our country. They've got $5 bills in their country. We've got the 10. This is from 2007, your $10 bill. Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. The 20. Now we're getting into some larger bills. We've got the 500. Moving on to the 1,000. And these bills, actually, some of these were fairly well circulated in Zimbabwe. Moving on to the 10,000. Now, this was basically a check to pay the bearer on demand by a specific date. They did this kind of in the transitionary period where they were trying to basically take zeros off of their currency. They were trying to figure out what they were going to do, and things were starting to get into crisis mode at this point. Moving on, we've got our $100,000 note. $100,000 promised to pay the bearer on demand. And there is some beautiful artwork on these notes, no doubt. Moving on, here's a $500,000 paying the bearer on demand. Got some elephants playing in the marshes, having a grand old time. They're not worried about hyperinflation. Now we're up to the big notes. So this is supposed to be redeemed by June 2008. It's a $10 million check from the Bank of Zimbabwe. Now we're getting into the bigger notes. So we've got the $10 trillion note. So this is in 2008. Once Zimbabwe started getting into the trillions, basically the currency was being devalued at a rate so fast they couldn't get the higher denomination notes into the people's hands. Zimbabwe had an annual inflation rate of 231 million%, with prices doubling every 17 days. It's just incredible to think about. Where 2007, 2006, your $1 in Zimbabwe would actually go somewhere. You could use it for something. And at this point in 2008, you need trillions of dollars. It just shows how fast things can spiral out of control. This is the $20 trillion note. Got a guy here probably mining for gold, which is considerably more valuable than the paper. And, of course, we've got the $50 trillion note, so getting into some big bucks here. And also, they do have a big hydroelectric dam in Zimbabwe. And again, we've got another elephant here. And finally, the big kahuna, the $100 trillion note. Now, this bill is actually the highest denomination note in world history. No other country has a note with this denomination on it. Quite impressive for a country as small as Zimbabwe. And you can see here it's got a water buffalo, you've got the waterfalls, kind of the water theme. But with this note, from my research, it could basically get you a bus ticket for about a week. So even $100 trillion in late 2008, you could barely buy anything. And there's lots of examples of children and adults basically going around in the town with just armfuls of money, talking about how they're trillionaires and they can't buy anything. And that's what is so scary about a paper fiat system, because we get into a situation where our money is backed by nothing but a promise. The United States dollar is no different. If we think that we're better than Zimbabwe, or we're too smart to find ourselves in a situation like this, we're dead wrong. We need to look at these examples as a cautionary tale to help tell us in the United States what not to do so that we can protect the integrity of our money, protect our purchasing power, and keep our country the greatest country on earth, in my humble opinion. But what do I know? That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and a thumbs up, share with your friends, comment in the comment section. Tell me what you think about all this. And until next time, Napoleonic Stacker, signing out.